Hi, welcome to Cooking from the Classics. I'm Deanna from Pisan Academy, and this is a show where we create recipes that were referred to in classic literature. Today's recipe is a sweet recipe from Jane Austen's beloved novel, Emma. We're going to be making rout cakes, or they could be pronounced root cakes depending on how you want to pronounce them, but it's spelled R-O-U-T without an E. These cakes were referred to in the novel by Mrs. Elton, who is kind of a piece of work.
Jane, you're a very, very fragile creature, and you pay no regard to the delicacy of your constitution. Jane.
She passive-aggressively is talking about her new neighbors and comments how they did not have ice at their party. They lacked 2 parlors, and their root cakes were not up to par. And so we're going to be making these. Now, the recipe that I'm using is from this book, Dining with Mr. Darcy.
Mr. Darcy?
Miss Bennet.
Which is a great book because it has recipes that are adapted from the original recipes in the 1800s. And what is included are foods that were referred to in either Jane Austen's novels or in her letters. These cakes come from a recipe from 1806, and a lot of times with these older recipes, the measurements are a little off or not even included. Sometimes they'll just say about a pound of flour, and the time for baking and even the temperature isn't always exact. Sometimes they'll say bake for a short while, and also, the ingredients may not be something that you're familiar with or have ever heard of. They may not even be around anymore, so we have to figure out how to recreate older recipes. What's nice about these types of cookbooks is that they've done all the legwork for us. So we're going to make rout cakes according to the recipe in Dining with Mr. Darcy. I'm going to go over the ingredients and the measurements, and then we'll get cooking. So the first ingredient are currants, and currants are typically used in British baking in lieu of raisins. But if you can't find currants, you can definitely use raisins in this recipe. And then you're going to have half a stick of butter, 1 egg, a 1/4 cup of sugar, and 3/4 cup of self-rising flour. If you don't have self-rising flour, you can use 3/4 cup of flour and about a 1/4 teaspoon, maybe a little more, of baking powder. Self-rising flour is just flour with baking powder already added. And then we have rose water and orange blossom water. Now, in the 1800s, it was very common to use floral essences and waters in cooking. And so I was able to find these at more kind of a gourmet store in my neighborhood. If you don't have them, you can use orange extract, but it's not the same. It might have too strong of a flavor. So if you can, find the waters. Maybe you can find them online if you can't find them locally. And then the recipe, the original one, calls for sherry and brandy, or sweet wine and brandy. I'm using cognac because that's just what I had around. So these are the ingredients. It's 1 teaspoon of each of the waters and 1 tablespoon of the cognac or brandy or sweet wine or sherry. There are 2 parts to combining the ingredients. There's the liquid ingredients, which include the egg, the orange water, the rose water, and the cognac, and you're going to mix those together in a small bowl. And then there's the flour mixture, where you're going to take the flour and the butter, and you can use a pastry blender and combine those, and then add the sugar and the currants, mix that well, and then you'll slowly add the liquid ingredients into your flour mixture. Now the recipe says that you may not need all of the liquid ingredients, so we'll see how it goes. After mixing it for a few minutes, it should look like this, and the butter should be crumbled and coated in flour. And now I have a wooden spoon to mix the rest of the ingredients. So I'm going to add the sugar and mix that in. And then I'm going to add the currants. And again, you can definitely use raisins in this recipe. Okay, so your mixture should look like a dry cake mix with chocolate chips in it. So that's what you're striving for. And then we're going to slowly add the liquid until we get to a consistency where it's a little bit sticky, and we can just drop them on a parchment-lined cooking sheet. Okay, so I'm just going to be adding the liquid in slowly, and you want the batter to be sticky and that it holds together. And probably if you've made homemade biscuits before, that's the texture that you're going to be looking for. And again, if you don't use all the liquid, that's fine. The recipe says that you may not. But I still, if you look at the bottom there, I still have some crumbs that aren't sticking, so I'm going to add a little more of the liquid. And that should be getting pretty close. And this is easier to mix with a wooden spoon at this point, as opposed to a fork or pastry blender or anything like that. So you can see that it's all coming together now. So that is the texture that you want, and you'll notice I do still have some of the liquid, which is perfectly fine and actually to be expected with this recipe. Now this will make about 12 little root cakes, and you're going to cook it on 375 for 10 to 12 minutes. But make sure that you're watching it because they do cook up very quickly towards the end. So this will make about 12 cakes, like I said, and you're just going to spoon it on like you would chocolate chip cookies. And you'll notice the dough is a little bit sticky. And they'll spread out a lot. You don't need a lot of room on the cookie sheet because they're not going to spread out. They're going to puff up a little bit. And I've lined my cookie sheet with parchment paper and then sprayed a little bit of oil. The recipe does say that you should have a greased cookie sheet. I just like to use parchment paper for baking as well. So when we have all of these spooned on, then we will pop them in the oven, again 375 for about 10 to 12 minutes, and start watching them at about 9 minutes. And if your oven runs hot, you may want to start watching them at about 8 minutes because they will brown up and they can burn on the bottom quite easily, just like biscuits. So the root cakes are done, and I am ready to try it. I made myself a cup of tea to go with it in my Jane Austen mug. So let's give these a try. So these are very good. You can really taste that floral water. It's got a rose, but also a hint of an orange. And if you like floral teas like I do, then you're really going to like these. If you're not used to having some floral essence in your teas or in your foods, then it might be a little bit of a surprise, but it's quite nice. I think these would be lovely for breakfast or even a tea or a lunch in the warmer months. And definitely need to have a cup of tea with it. So this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed making this recipe. I'm such a Jane Austen fan, and this is the first thing I've made from this cookbook. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time on Cooking from the Classics.